Hey Theologians, I'm Ani from the Women in Theology, and today we're going to be taking a closer look at the first step of the OICA Method, which is observations. Okay, if you haven't already checked out our first video in this series where it's just a quick introduction on the OICA Method, I'm going to have that link down below for you. Make sure you watch that first. But if you've already seen it, let's jump right into observations. So the key word for the observation step would be look, because all you are literally doing in this step is looking at your passage and taking notes. And you don't need anything besides your biblical text and something to take notes on, whether that's a computer, an iPad, notebook, pen, whatever it is. So what do you actually observe? Well, we have created a handy-dandy observation guide for you that we have linked down below.
Now all we need is our handy-dandy notebook. Right, see? Still got it right here.
And in it we have 5 main categories of stuff that you can observe. The first one is general observations. These are things like names, places, time references, events. This could be something like a city, where we have Ephesus, or we have an event like Passover. So you note these kinds of things, and if you don't know what those are, that can be a key point for you to look for and to study in the next few steps. The next category would be observations regarding like literary structure, which would be things like transitional words, therefore, because, so that, things that would suggest the author's flow of thought, or even genre and the theme of that specific passage. Because a lot of times the Bible writers, they don't think the way we do. They have a lot more circular talking and reasoning, and so pointing out these words and noticing this element would help us understand their flow of thought better. All right, next we have literary devices, figures of speech, metaphors, hyperboles. These are very important to note because they help us to understand how to actually interpret them, because we don't interpret every single passage the same way, which will be another video, but noticing these things will help us determine how to actually interpret the passage. All right, the next category is theological observations. This is where you ask questions like, what does this teach me about God, God's nature, humanity, God's relationship with humanity, sin, all of these kinds of big picture type of questions or observations. This is where you would note those. And the last section is questions. We recommend that you be asking questions all throughout, like what does a word mean? What does this phrase mean? What does this event actually mean to the audience? All of these things, because questions are a very important part of the observation step. Every passage is not going to have every single one of those elements. You can definitely have passages that don't have a city name or don't have a theological point that it's making. But these are things, it's just a guide for you to kind of reference and look for as you do observations. And with that said, we're going to be jumping into a quick demonstration on how to do observations. But as a quick disclaimer, we do not, under any circumstances, recommend you studying a passage in a vacuum without considering the context. But for the purposes of this video, we will just be taking a look at Colossians chapter 2, verses 6 and 7.
Okay, here's our passage, and it is in the NASB. And right off the bat, we see the word here, therefore, which is a transitional word that connects to the previous passage. And if I was doing a more in-depth study, I would be going back there to see what the connection is. Therefore, as you have received Christ Jesus the Lord, so walk in him. We have as, so, which is like a since then statement. So since the first has happened, which is in the past, now in the present, we need a certain action, which here Paul is commanding that we walk in him. So we've received Christ, now we must walk in him. So there seems to be a distinction, right? These two are not the same. So received and walk are not the same actions. We have a person here who is Christ Jesus the Lord. And I wonder if there's any significance in Paul using the 2 titles of Jesus, which are Christ and the Lord. So I'm going to make a note here to look that up in the next step of OICA. Having been firmly rooted, again, another past action, been firmly rooted in him, and now being built up. being built up. So again, this seems to have this whole past present pattern, which I'm going to make a note in there's one in verse 6 and one in verse 7. So past action has led to a present consequence. And in the first one, it seems like the past action as you have received. So this isn't an active voice, this isn't a passive voice, which suggests that we received it not by our own doing. This is an imperative, which is a command. Having been firmly rooted, again, kind of the passive voice over here as well. And now being built up. This is also in the passive voice. So I'm just going to make notes of that. Having been firmly rooted. So here we have like a metaphor of a tree idea and the roots. So Paul is definitely trying to paint a picture with this word. And then being built up, and that also is more of a metaphor, like a house and a foundation. So there's a foundation. So we see some metaphoric, figurative language here. And I'm curious as to what the significance of using an agricultural and an architectural kind of language. And I feel like this has to do with the audience and how they would have understood it. So this is another thing that I will be noting and looking up in the next step. So now being built up in him and established in your faith. Established, what does that really mean, right? We don't understand what does it mean to be established. So maybe I'll make a note over here to do a word study on this in the next step. Established in your faith, just as you were instructed, and overflowing with gratitude. Another past action and overflowing with gratitude. I'm guessing the past is connected because of the word and here. And overflowing with gratitude. And that might be a cause for a further study on what was the cause of their gratitude, maybe a cultural context would help us understand what that actually means.
As you noticed, there were some things in the observation guide that we just didn't have in our text, like places or hyperbole or irony. And there's also some things that were in the text that I didn't mention for time's sake, but we raised some good questions that will fuel, I think, the rest of our study. We noticed some things that will help us understand the author's thought. And this is honestly my favorite step in the whole OICA method, because the Bible is so deep and so rich that all you have to do is just look at it sometimes and it will reveal so much to you.
Oh, look, everyone, we're all making observations.
Well, I hope this video was helpful to you, and remember that we have the observation guide linked down below in the description box. And we want to hear from you. Was there something that you noticed that we didn't mention, or an observation that kind of stood out to you? Please let us know in the comment section below, and make sure you like this video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit that bell to be notified whenever we upload future videos. And don't forget to check out the rest of the video in this series. Bye! You will be taking a look at whatever it is. Oh my god. It's recording? Did you take it? Okay, wait, no.